Let's take care of the last piece of our app, which is our profile page. You might have noticed that we're passing through the user's ID to our profile route, and this is so that we can get that user's individual data and provide it within our profile page with the help, if we head to our Apollo DevTools, of our user query. So remember our user query, where we can query for a given user according to their ID. Well, when our component mounts, our profile component, we're going to get that user's data by passing the ID value from the route to the argument ID within the user query. And I'm going to make my DevTools pretty large here because we're going to request a lot of things from this query if we take a look at the user type which it returns. In addition to asking for the user's ID, as well as stuff like their username, we're going to get the date that they joined. We also want to get the tracks that they've created, and that's available from this track set array. So from track set, we want to get each of the tracks ID, title, URL, and we'll get their like count from likes, and on that grab the ID of each of the likes. And then we also want to get the tracks that they've liked from this like set array, which we've worked with previously. So from like set, we want to get the ID of each of the likes, and on the likes, we want to get the track itself, data about the track itself that was liked, and on it, the ID, title, URL, its like count, so again, likes and the ID subfield, and finally the posted by field with ID and username in it. So if we pass in a valid integer, a valid user's ID to the ID argument, and execute this query, we should get back all of that information. And before we start working on this component on this page, I just want to walk through how we're going to be displaying things here. We want to display the username of the user whose profile that we're looking at, the username, when they joined with date joined, then an area for the tracks that they've created. So for each track we'll include the like count, we'll make it possible to play those tracks, and then underneath we'll have an area for liked tracks. So let's begin by heading to our pages directory, then profile. We'll uncomment our imports, and we'll bring in the things that we need up at the top. Since this is a query, we'll grab the query component in GQL. We'll also import the components that we'll need. So of course we'll need the loading and error components for our query component. And we'll also need the audio player to play individual tracks. So we'll import first audio player from ..components/shared/audio player. And then we'll next we need to figure out how we're going to get this ID value and pass it to our query component. Well, if we take a look at our React DevTools when we're on the profile page, if we search for profile, we'll see that on our props we get access to this match object. Match gives us information like the path and the URL, And this is provided to us because of how we set up, or rather that we set up, React Router within our root component. So since we created a route and linked it to our profile component, profile gets access to information about the route that we're currently on, and we can get just the user ID at the end by going to match params ID. So first, let's destructure within profile the match object from props. Then we'll create a variable called ID set to match.params.id, and then we can return our query component. We'll set the query prop to profile query, and we'll pass into the variable's object our one variable ID. We'll add our function and destructure from the parameters data, loading, and error. We're going to add our two conditionals. If loading, return the loading component, and if error, return the error component with the error passed to the error prop. And next we're going to return our JSX with all of our query data within it. So we'll first start with a div, and up at the top will be our user info card. So this will contain information about the user whose profile we're looking at. It'll first contain a card with the class name classes.card. Within it we'll have a card header component, which will just be one tag. And the card header will have an avatar, which will contain an avatar component, and within it we're just going to grab the first letter of the user's username, and that's going to come from data.user.username, and we can grab the first letter by adding a set of brackets and grab from that string the 0th element, almost as if this was an array. Then we'll provide the title to this header on a title prop. That's going to come from data.user.username. This will have a subheader which will contain when the user joined. So we'll add template literals and say joined, and then interpolate the date joined value from data.user.dateJoined. Then underneath the card we'll provide the created tracks that the given user created. We're going to start with a paper component, which will have an elevation of 1 and the class name classes.paper. Within it we'll have a typography component, the variant of title and the class name classes.title. And between the tags we'll first have an icon, the audio track icon, with the class name classes.audio icon, and to the right of it the text created tracks. Underneath typography we'll take data.user.trackset, and remember that this is an array, so we'll map over it with the map array method, and for each track we'll return a div, and the key on the div is going to be set to track.id. Within the div we'll have a typography component again. Between those tags we'll first have the track title from track.title, then the number of likes from track.likes.length, and then after the interpolated value the text likes. Then after typography we'll have our audio player, and to it, remember, we need to provide the URL, and that's going to come from track.url, and then we'll have a divider under every track element, where the class name will be classes.divider. Then underneath the paper component we'll have our area for liked tracks. Again, it's going to start with the paper component as the backdrop with an elevation 1 and the class name classes.paper. Again, it'll include typography, the variant title, class name, classes.title. This will contain first a thumb up icon, the class name classes.thumb icon, and the text liked tracks. Then we'll iterate over the like set coming from data.user.likeset. We'll map over it, and instead of iterating over every like, we want to iterate over every track again. So we'll add another set of parentheses, destructure the track property, so that now we'll first iterate over a div element, and the key will be set to track ID. And to supply the rest of the track data, we'll start with a typography component. Again, we'll include track.title, then the like count from track.likes.length, the text likes, and then after that we'll include the username of the user that posted this track from track.postedby.username. Then underneath typography we'll have our audio player pass through the URL from track.url, and once again we'll have our divider at the bottom, the class name classes.divider. So now let's save profile and check things out in the browser. And now if we close our console, we can see our area up at the top, the user's avatar, their username, when they joined. Then we see an area for created tracks with the title, like count, and we can play that track. And the same for the tracks that they've liked. On it we appended the username of the user that created the track that was liked. And this profile page can be visited for any user. So let's move away from the Doug profile and head over to Reed. And here we can see all of the information associated with his profile.